Welcome back to Social Security Post, the channel where we break down the biggest stories that impact your Social Security, your retirement, and your future. Today's news might be one of the most critical we've ever covered. Imagine waking up to find out a special government department has been granted unprecedented access to your most sensitive Social Security data without your consent and without full explanation. That's exactly what just happened. The Supreme Court has handed down two emergency rulings giving the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, the green light to dig into the very backbone of the SSA's systems. This includes everything from your earnings records and medical files to your social security number and bank data. We're talking about the type of information that, in the wrong hands, could lead to major breaches of trust or worse. But that's just the beginning. These rulings come at a time when DOGE is under increasing scrutiny. The agency, closely tied to tech billionaire Elon Musk until just days ago, was created to overhaul federal bureaucracy, but critics say it's now operating in a legal gray area that gives it sweeping control without enough oversight. In today's video, we'll explore how this happened, what it means for you and your benefits, and why the justices were so divided. Stick with me into the end because I'll explain what this could mean for the future of Social Security access, government transparency, and your personal rights. And if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to Social Security Post, and hit the bell icon so you never miss these critical updates. In one of the two emergency decisions, the U.S. Supreme Court lifted a block imposed by a Maryland-based federal judge that had prevented DOGE personnel from accessing sensitive SSA systems. This block had originally been put in place to protect data such as social security numbers, medical records, mental health histories, bank account information, and individual earnings. With this ruling, DOGE operatives can now legally enter the SSA systems under the guise of modernizing operations and identifying fraud. The majority of justices didn't offer much explanation in their decision, simply stating that SSA may proceed to afford members of the SSA DOGE team access to the agency record. It was a sentence that carried massive implications, effectively opening the floodgates for one of the most powerful federal bodies to scrutinize your most personal data. What's deeply troubling for privacy advocates is how little transparency surrounds this move. Critics argue that there were existing protocols in place that allowed anonymized or redacted data to be shared without exposing personally identifiable information. Why weren't those sufficient? DOGE's sudden full access raises fears that Americans' private lives are now more vulnerable to surveillance or misuse. For those receiving Social Security, SSDI, or SSI, this ruling isn't just about cybersecurity. It's about whether the government can peer into your life with minimal oversight. And let's not forget, this isn't some theoretical agency. It's a real department with increasing authority, now granted full access to data that affects over 70 million people across the country. Just one day before the Supreme Court rulings were issued, President Donald Trump's once prominent partnership with Elon Musk, the tech billionaire who had become the public face of DOGE, spectacularly fell apart. Their split was highly public, with Musk distancing himself from political commentary and Trump reaffirming his support for DOGE as a tool to streamline and purify the government. But make no mistake, this breakup doesn't reduce DOGE's power. If anything, it leaves more questions about who's truly in charge of this rapidly growing department. For months, Musk had symbolized DOGE's mission to bring Silicon Valley efficiency into Washington bureaucracy. Now, with Trump doubling down, the Supreme Court backing the agency, and Musk out of the picture, the power vacuum could result in even more aggressive oversight tactics. For Social Security recipients, this political turmoil shouldn't be ignored. The SSA is no longer operating in isolation. It's now under increased influence from political bodies and advisory teams like DOGE, whose true leadership and agendas are murky at best. While Trump argues that DOGE is necessary to combat fraud, the lack of internal transparency raises serious red flags. If your benefits, appeals, or case reviews end up under scrutiny from DOGE auditors with little legal pushback, you might have Elon Musk and Trump's former alliance to thank for it. And if the current administration continues to defend DOGE's actions, it could mark a permanent shift in how personal data is monitored and analyzed under federal watch. The legal case against DOGE's access to SSA systems was driven by a coalition of government unions and the nonprofit Democracy Forward. They argued that DOGE's unfettered access to deeply personal information violates not only privacy laws, but also long-standing SSA protocols. These groups weren't objecting to DOGE's existence, They were objecting to the way DOGE wanted to operate. They argued that DOGE's methods were too invasive, too hasty, and failed to respect necessary safeguards such as training and data anonymization. U.S. District Judge Ellen Hollander agreed, placing a temporary hold and ordering SSA to provide only limited access to redacted data. But with the Supreme Court's latest ruling, those protections are gone, leaving many wondering what rules, if any, still apply. The Biden-era critics, including Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, raised alarms about what this decision means for future government oversight. Jackson, along with Justice Sonia Sotomayor, said the court had jettisoned careful judicial decision-making by handing over access so easily. Their concern wasn't just about the data, it was about the precedent. If DOGE can bypass basic legal barriers in the name of efficiency, what stops other departments from doing the same? What's worse, it gives the impression that DOGE is being treated as an exception rather than being held to the same standards as any other federal body. For seniors relying on SSA, this may feel like a betrayal. Your data is no longer just yours, it's now part of a massive bureaucratic experiment. The second major ruling from the Supreme Court came in the Freedom of Information Act FOIA case that questioned DOGE transparency. A lower court judge had previously ruled that DOGE must release internal documents, specifically recommendations it made to federal agencies, and even ordered the deposition of DOGE's acting administrator, Amy Gleason. The judge's reasoning was clear. If DOGE is acting like a government agency, it should be treated like one under FOIA, which gives citizens the right to request internal government records. But in a dramatic reversal, the Supreme Court stepped in and wiped that order clean, stating that the judge's directive was not appropriately tailored and encroached on executive branch authority. In other words, DOGE doesn't have to share its documents or face discovery, at least for now. This ruling sends a powerful message. DOGE is being protected as if it's part of the inner circle of the White House, immune to the same transparency standards we apply to nearly every other agency. The justices emphasized separation of powers as their rationale, arguing that courts should not intrude into internal executive branch communications. But critics argue this creates a dangerous blind spot. If the public has no way of knowing what recommendations DOGE is making or how it's influencing Social Security and other federal policies, how can we hold it accountable? For Americans who rely on Social Security, this means decisions about your benefits, reviews, or fraud investigations could be shaped behind closed doors, with no opportunity to question or even view those decisions. One of the central questions in this legal saga is deceptively simple. What is DOGE? The Trump administration insists it's not a federal agency, but a presidential advisory body housed in the executive office of the president. That classification means it isn't subject to FOIA or many of the transparency and accountability laws that govern traditional government entities. If this classification holds, DOGE could shape everything from agency staffing to fraud investigations to benefit eligibility, all without the public ever seeing its internal documents. Supporters say this flexibility is necessary to root out waste and modernize outdated systems, but opponents fear it creates a shadow agency operating without oversight or legal restraint. The consequences of this classification go far beyond legal terminology. If DOGE isn't officially an agency, then how far can it go when interfacing with SSA data? Can it flag beneficiaries for fraud reviews? Can it propose eligibility changes? Can it recommend SSA office closures based on efficiency studies? These are the very real implications for the tens of millions of Americans relying on Social Security. The legal gray zone DOGE operates in may give it extraordinary influence over programs that directly impact your life, all without public hearings, all without your consent. And right now, the Supreme Court has backed DOGE's hands-off status, meaning this murky classification could define its future for years to come. This case also reveals just how ideologically divided the current Supreme Court has become, especially when it comes to executive power. The three justices appointed by Democratic presidents, Justices Jackson, Sotomayor, and Kagan, all dissented from the majority rulings. Justice Jackson was especially critical, stating that the court was effectively treating the Trump administration's request as ordinary when it should have been seen as extraordinary. In her view, DOGE was being given special treatment with none of the legal rigor typically applied to emergency rulings. These dissenting opinions raise serious questions about judicial independence and the future of checks and balances in U.S. governance. For Social Security recipients, the stakes are high. If the court continues to side with executive power over public oversight, the agencies and advisory bodies controlling your benefits could operate with fewer constraints. The ideological split in this ruling wasn't just academic, it reflected a deeper philosophical battle over how much power presidents and their inner teams should have. If these rulings are a sign of things to come, DOGE and possibly similar executive bodies may gain more access, more influence, and less accountability, all while staying outside the spotlight. That's a concerning reality for millions of Americans who depend on SSA programs for financial survival. The Supreme Court's majority opinion leaned heavily on the doctrine of separation of powers to justify its ruling. They argued that courts should not interfere in the executive branch's internal affairs, especially when it comes to advising the president. While this principle is foundational to the U.S. Constitution, critics argue that it's being stretched to an extreme in this case. By shielding DOGE from transparency, the court has essentially made it untouchable, creating what some legal analysts are calling a ghost agency, operating under the president's name but free from external review. This lack of judicial scrutiny could have far-reaching consequences for how power is exercised in Washington. What does this mean for Social Security recipients? Means that DOGE could shape the SSA's policies, data reviews, and fraud investigations without ever facing meaningful legal challenges or public oversight. The idea that the executive branch should have room to govern is understandable, but not when it threatens the transparency and fairness of critical agencies like the SSA. Seniors and disabled Americans deserve to know how and why decisions about their benefits are made. With this ruling, that transparency becomes more elusive. Separation of powers is supposed to protect democracy, not obscure it. These two rulings are just the beginning. Legal experts expect more cases involving DOGE to reach the Supreme Court in the coming months, from questions about its personnel authority to broader FOIA challenges. The legal system is far from done evaluating DOGE's role in the federal structure. But with these back-to-back victories, the Trump administration and its legal team are emboldened. DOGE now has a stronger legal footing to access government systems, influence policy, and reject public transparency requests. And with the Supreme Court seemingly siding with them, the trajectory appears to be in DOGE's favor. For viewers of Social Security Post, this means one thing: stay vigilant. The role of DOGE in shaping the SSA's future is becoming more significant by the day. Whether it's changing eligibility thresholds, revamping fraud detection methods, or even recommending budget cuts, the agency's actions could directly impact your checks, appeals, and benefits. We'll continue to follow every development, so make sure to subscribe, share, and comment below with your thoughts. Have you noticed any unusual changes in your SSA interactions recently? Let us know. Your voice matters more than ever. What we've covered today may feel technical, even buried in legal language, but make no mistake, this is one of the most important shifts in Social Security oversight in recent memory. The Department of Government Efficiency now has legal clearance to access sensitive SSA systems, avoid public transparency, and operate with limited oversight, all backed by the highest court in the land. For millions of Social Security, SSDI, and SSI recipients, this should raise alarm. These are your records, your benefits, your financial future, and decisions about them are now being made behind a much darker curtain. Thank you for watching Social Security Post. If you found this video informative, please hit the like button. It really helps us reach more people who need to stay informed. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the critical updates we provide. And don't forget to comment with your opinions. Do you trust DOGE with your data? Are you worried about this Supreme Court decision? Let's talk about it below. Stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next update, where we'll reveal how DOGE's fraud monitoring efforts could quietly lead to mass benefit reevaluations. You won't want to miss it.